The results of that investigation, which I received 2 weeks later, were enlightening. David and Sarah were not nearly as financially secure as they appeared. Despite David's good salary, they were carrying significant debt: credit cards, a home equity loan, car payments, and the mortgage on their house. They'd been living beyond their means for years, maintaining their lifestyle through borrowing rather than actual wealth. More interestingly, they'd taken out a $50,000 home equity loan just 6 months after I'd moved in with them. The timing wasn't coincidental. They'd used my $120,000 contribution to pay down existing debts, then immediately borrowed against their home's increased equity to fund renovations and lifestyle expenses. In other words, they'd used my money to temporarily improve their financial position, then leverage that improvement to go even deeper into debt. They weren't just ungrateful for my financial contribution. They'd actually made their long-term financial situation worse by using it as justification for additional borrowing. Armed with this knowledge, I made my final preparations. I arranged for a moving company to pack and transport my belongings from Phoenix to Charleston on short notice. I set up utilities and services at the Charleston house under my name. I transferred my prescriptions to a pharmacy near my new home and found a local doctor to handle my ongoing medical care. Most importantly, I planned exactly how I wanted to reveal my new circumstances to David and Sarah. Because I wasn't just leaving, I was making a statement about respect, dignity, and the consequences of taking people for granted. The confrontation that opened this story, the moment when David called me a burden and told me to figure out my own life, happened. On a Thursday morning in late February 2024, I was in the kitchen, washing my coffee cup and mentally rehearsing the conversation I'd been planning, when David walked in wearing that expression of barely concealed irritation that had become his default look whenever he had to interact with me. "Mom," he said, without preamble, "Sarah and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you to start seriously looking for your own place. This arrangement isn't working anymore." I continued washing my cup, taking my time, letting him reveal exactly how he wanted to handle this conversation. "We've been patient," he continued. "But you've been here for almost 2 years now. And frankly, you're becoming a real burden. Maybe it's time you figured out your own life instead of depending on us for everything." There it was, the word burden. The dismissal of everything I'd contributed. The suggestion that I was a dependent rather than someone who'd given them the largest financial gift they'd ever received. I dried my hands carefully, turned to face him, and smiled. "You're absolutely right, David," I said calmly. "It is time for me to figure out my own life." He looked surprised by my easy agreement. He'd probably been prepared for tears, arguments, or pleas for more time. "I'll be out by this weekend," I continued. "In fact, I'll be out today." Now he looked confused. "Today? Mom, you don't have to leave today. We're not throwing you out on the street." "Oh, I know you're not throwing me out. I'm choosing to leave. There's a difference." I walked past him toward my room, then paused at the doorway. "And David? You might want to clear your schedule for next week. I have a feeling you're going to want to take some time off work." The look of confusion on his face was priceless. He had no idea what was coming, but he was about to find out. The look of confusion on his face was priceless. He had no idea what was coming, but he was about to find out. I went to my room and closed the door, then sat on my twin bed and pulled out my phone. The moving company I'd contacted weeks earlier was on speed dial. "This is Margaret Carter," I said when they answered. "I'd like to schedule that pickup for today, please." "As soon as possible." "Today, Mrs. Carter? I thought we had scheduled for next week." "Plans have changed. How quickly can you get here?" "We could have a crew there by 2 p.m. if that works for you." I looked at my watch. It was 9:30 a.m. Perfect timing. "That's perfect. And remember, I need everything packed carefully and shipped to the Charleston address we discussed. No exceptions." "Understood, ma'am." We'll see you at 2 p.m. Next, I called Grace in Charleston. Grace, it's Margaret. I'm coming home. Today. Today? Oh my goodness, how exciting. But I thought you weren't planning to move until next month. Change of plans. The situation here has resolved itself sooner than expected. Can you have the house ready for me by this evening? Of course. I'll get fresh flowers, stock the refrigerator, and make sure everything is perfect for your arrival. What time should I expect you? My flight lands at 8 p.m. I'll take a taxi from the airport. Nonsense. I'll pick you up myself. This is such wonderful news, Margaret. You're going to love being home. Home. The word sent a warm feeling through my chest that I hadn't experienced in almost 2 years. My third call was to Mr. Hutchinson. William, it's Margaret Carter. I'm making the move today. Today? That's wonderful news, but rather sudden. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect. In fact, it couldn't be better. But I'm going to need some assistance with a rather delicate situation that's likely to arise in the next few days. What kind of assistance? I explained what I had in mind, and after a long pause, Mr. Hutchinson chuckled. Margaret, you continue to surprise me. Yes, I can certainly arrange what you're requesting. It will be my pleasure, actually. Excellent. I'll call you from Charleston tonight to confirm the timing. My final call was to book a first-class ticket on the 5 p.m. flight to Charleston. After nearly 2 years of living like a pensioner counting every penny, it felt deliciously liberating to pay for first class without even checking the price. Then I began packing. Not the slow, careful packing of someone who has time to reminisce over belongings and make tough decisions about what to keep. This was efficient, purposeful packing, the kind you do when you know exactly where you're going and why. I folded my clothes systematically, wrapped my few precious items in newspaper, and packed Robert's photo with extra care. Everything fit into the same 2 suitcases I'd arrived with, plus 1 additional box for books and papers. The rest, the furniture I'd accumulated, the small appliances I'd bought, the decorative touches I'd added to try to make the guest room feel like home, would go with the movers. Not because I needed any of it, but because I wanted to leave the room completely empty. I wanted them to see exactly what my departure looked like. At 11 a.m., there was a soft knock on my door. Mom? David's voice sounded uncertain. Can we talk? I opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable. Behind him, I could see Sarah hovering near the kitchen, pretending to be busy but obviously listening. Of course, David. What would you like to talk about? He glanced around my room, taking in the suitcases and boxes, the stripped bed, the empty dresser top. You're really leaving today? I told you I was. But where are you going? Do you have a place lined up? Do you need help finding somewhere? To stay temporarily? His concern would have been touching if it had appeared 2 years earlier. Now it just seemed like guilty conscience masquerading as parental duty. I have somewhere to go, I said simply. Where? Does it matter? He looked stung by the question. Of course it matters. You're my mother. Yes, I am. And you just told me I was a burden who needed to figure out my own life. I didn't mean... He stopped, ran his hand through his hair, tried again. Look, maybe we all just need some space to cool down. You don't have to leave permanently. Maybe just a few weeks, until we can figure out a better arrangement. I studied his face, looking for any genuine remorse, any real recognition of how he'd been treating me. Instead, I saw someone trying to manage a situation that had gotten out of hand more quickly than he'd expected. David, in the past 2 years, how many times have you asked me about my day? What? How many times have you asked me how I was feeling, what I was thinking about, whether I was happy living here? How many times have you treated me like a person whose thoughts and feelings mattered to you? He opened his mouth, then closed it. Again. How many times have you included me in family decisions? asked for my opinion on anything more significant than what to watch on TV, made me feel like I was a valued member of this household rather than an inconvenient guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Mom, How many times, David? The silence stretched between us. I could see him mentally reviewing the past 2 years, probably realizing for the first time how completely he'd excluded me from the family life I'd helped to finance. I thought you were happy here, he said finally. Did you? Or did you just not think about whether I was happy at all? Sarah appeared in the doorway behind David, her face tight with the kind of expression people wear when they're preparing to justify themselves. Margaret, if you were unhappy, you should have said something. I turned my attention to her. Like I did at Christmas when I tried to talk about making the holidays more inclusive. That's not... Or like when I offered to contribute more to groceries and utilities and you said it wasn't necessary. We were trying to be generous. Or like when I suggested we establish better boundaries in communication, and you agreed that something needed to change. She had the grace to look away. The truth is, I continued, I did try to talk about these issues multiple times. But you weren't interested in making the situation work better for everyone. You were interested in managing me until I reached the conclusion that leaving was my own idea. David and Sarah exchanged one of their looks, the kind of marital telepathy that had excluded me from countless conversations over the past 2 years. What do you want from us, Mom? David asked. It was such a telling question, not, what can we do to fix this? Or, how can we make you feel valued? But, what do you want from us? As if my expectations were demands he resented having to meet. I don't want anything from you, I said honestly. Not anymore. At 2 p.m. sharp, the moving truck pulled into their driveway. I watched from my bedroom window as 3 professional movers got out and began unloading equipment. They were efficient, courteous, and clearly accustomed to handling delicate family situations. David and Sarah stood in the living room, watching in obvious shock as the movers systematically packed and removed every trace of my presence from their home. The furniture I'd bought, the kitchen appliances I'd contributed, the decorative touches that had made the guest room livable, all of it disappeared into the truck within 2 hours. Mrs. Carter, the crew chief said when they were finished, everything's packed and loaded. We'll have it delivered to your Charleston address by Saturday morning. Charleston? David's voice cracked slightly. You're moving to Charleston? Yes. But that's across the country. We'll never see you. I looked at him, this man I'd raised and sacrificed for and loved unconditionally for 42 years, and felt a profound sense of finality. David, when was the last time you really saw me? Not just acknowledged my physical presence, but actually saw me as a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams of my own? He didn't answer because we both knew the answer. At 4 p.m., my taxi arrived to take me to the airport. I wheeled my suitcase to the front door, where David and Sarah stood watching like spectators at an accident they couldn't quite believe was happening. Mom, wait, David said as I reached for the door handle. What about Emma and Jake? Don't you want to say goodbye to them? It was a low blow, and we all knew it. Using my grandchildren as emotional leverage at the moment I was walking away from his disrespect. The children are at school, I replied calmly. And honestly, David, they've been trained for months not to need me or want my involvement in their lives. I think they'll adjust to my absence just fine. Sarah's face flushed red. That's not fair. We never told them not to. You told Emma? That she shouldn't expect people to cook for her all the time. You told Jake that he needed to be more independent and not rely on others for help. You systematically discouraged them from forming closer bonds with me because you wanted them to need you, not me. She started to protest, but I held up my hand. It's fine, Sarah. You're their mother, and you have the right to control their relationships. But don't pretend you didn't deliberately create distance between me and the children, and don't use them as a weapon now to make me feel guilty for leaving. I opened the front door and looked back at them one final time. I left something for You on the kitchen counter, I said. You might want to read it after I'm gone. The taxi driver loaded my suitcase into the trunk, and I settled into the back seat without looking back at the house where I'd spent nearly 2 years learning exactly how little I meant to the people. I'd given everything to help. As we pulled away from the curb, I allowed myself one small smile. Because while David and Sarah thought they were watching a sad, defeated old woman leave their home with nowhere to go, what was actually happening was that a wealthy, independent woman was heading home to her mansion to begin the most exciting chapter of her life. They had no idea what they'd just lost, but they were about to find out. The letter I'd left on their kitchen counter was brief and to the point. David and Sarah, by the time you read this, I'll be on my way to my new home in Charleston, South Carolina. I want to thank you for the past 2 years. Not because they were happy years, but because they taught me important lessons about family, respect, and self-worth. You treated me like a burden because you believed I had no other options. You made me feel unwelcome in your home because you thought I was dependent on your charity. You excluded me from family decisions and diminished my role in your children's lives because you assumed I would accept whatever treatment you chose to give me. You were wrong on all counts. I have more options than you could possibly imagine. I am not dependent on anyone's charity, and I will never again accept being treated as less than I am worth. The $120,000 I gave you when I moved in was a gift, freely given out of love and a desire to help. I expect nothing in return for it, and I want you to feel no obligation because of it. Use it well. I won't be providing my new address or phone number. If you need to reach me, you can contact my attorney, William Hutchinson, at Hutchinson Moore and Associates in Charleston. He'll know how to find me. Take care of yourselves. And your children. I wish you well. Margaret. I'd deliberately kept the tone neutral and dignified. I hadn't accused them of anything they couldn't justify to themselves. I hadn't demanded apologies or explanations. I'd simply stated facts and walked away. But I'd also included Mr. Hutchinson's contact information for a reason, because I suspected that very soon they would indeed need to reach me. The flight to Charleston was smooth and peaceful. I sat in my first-class seat, sipping wine and watching the country pass beneath me, feeling lighter than I had in years. Every mile that passed between me and Phoenix felt like a weight being lifted from my shoulders. Grace was waiting for me at the airport, just as she'd promised, with a warm smile and a sign that read, "Welcome home, Mrs. Carter." "Oh, Margaret," she said as she hugged me. "It's so wonderful to have you back. The house has been waiting for you." The drive through Charleston at night was magical. The historic district glowed under street lamps, and I could see glimpses of beautiful gardens and elegant architecture that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this city during my first visit. When we pulled up to my house. On Rainbow Row, I sat in the car for a moment, just looking at it. The soft yellow exterior was illuminated by landscape lighting that highlighted the architectural details, and I could see warm light glowing through the windows that Grace had left on for my arrival. "It's really mine," I said softly. "It's really yours," Grace confirmed. "And it's been waiting patiently for you to come home." The inside of the house was even more beautiful than I remembered. Grace had filled it with fresh flowers, and I could smell something delicious cooking in the kitchen. Every room felt warm and welcoming, like the house itself was happy to finally have a permanent resident again. "I made your favorite seafood bisque," Grace said as she carried my suitcase upstairs to the master bedroom. "And I stocked the wine cellar with some lovely bottles I thought you might enjoy." That night, I sat in my library, surrounded by Eleanor's books and my own boxes that would be arriving soon, sipping wine and looking out at my private garden. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I was in a space that was entirely mine, surrounded by beautiful things that I owned, with no one to answer to and no one whose moods I had to manage. I called Mr. Hutchinson to confirm our plans for the following week. "How did it go?" he asked. Exactly as expected. They're confused, a little guilty, but mostly relieved. They have no idea what's coming. And you're certain you want to proceed with our plan? I'm certain. They need to learn what it feels like to need something from someone who doesn't need anything from them. Very well. I'll make the arrangements for Monday morning. After I hung up, I poured myself another glass of wine and sat on my back porch, listening to the sounds of Charleston at night. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear jazz music and laughter from the restaurants and bars along King Street. The air was warm and humid, fragrant with jasmine and magnolia. This was my life now. This beautiful house, this wonderful city, this sense of freedom and possibility that I hadn't felt since Robert died. David and Sarah had done me the biggest favor of my life by showing me exactly who they were and what our relationship really meant to them. They'd given me the clarity I needed to walk away without regret. But our story wasn't over yet. Because while I was settling into my new life, they were back in Phoenix, probably wondering where I'd gotten the money to hire professional movers and fly first class to Charleston. They were probably curious about how I'd managed to arrange a place to live across the country with just a few hours' notice. By Monday morning, they were going to have some answers to those questions, and those answers were going to change everything. They thought they knew about the woman they'd just treated like a burden. The weekend passed peacefully. I unpacked my personal belongings, arranged my furniture exactly where I wanted it, and took long walks through the historic district to reacquaint myself with my new neighborhood. I had lunch at a charming cafe on King Street, browsed the local bookstores, and visited the farmers market where vendors greeted me like a local rather than a tourist. On Sunday evening, I called the private investigator who'd been monitoring David and Sarah's financial situation. Any changes in their status since Friday? I asked. Nothing significant. They're still carrying the same debt load, still behind on a couple of credit card payments. Their mortgage is current, but just barely. Why do you ask? Because that's about to change. By Wednesday, I expect their situation to become much more urgent. Should I continue monitoring? Absolutely. In fact, I want daily reports starting tomorrow. Monday morning dawned clear and beautiful in Charleston. I had breakfast on my porch, read the newspaper in my garden, and at precisely 10 a.m. I called Mr. Hutchinson. "It's time," I said. "Consider it done." At that exact moment, 3 time zones away in Phoenix, David was sitting in his home office when his phone rang with a call that would turn his world upside down, just like mine had been turned upside down when I'd first heard from Mr. Hutchinson about Eleanor's inheritance. The difference was, David's phone call wasn't going to bring good news. It was going to bring consequences. At that exact moment, 3 time zones away in Phoenix, David was sitting in his home office when his phone rang with a call that would turn his world upside down, just like mine had been turned upside down when I'd first heard from Mr. Hutchinson about Eleanor's inheritance. The difference was, David's phone call wasn't going to bring good news. It was going to bring consequences. Mr. Carter? David Carter? The voice on the other end was professional, crisp, with no trace of the warmth that Mr. Hutchinson had shown me. Yes, this is David Carter. My name is Michael Rodriguez. I'm a senior loan officer with First National Phoenix. I'm calling regarding your home equity line of credit, account number ending in 4472. David felt his stomach clench. He'd been dreading this call for weeks, knowing that the promotional interest rate on their home equity loan was about to expire, which would dramatically increase their monthly payments. Yes, what about it? Mr. Carter, I'm calling to inform you that your entire home equity line of credit, the full balance of $127,000, has been called in for immediate repayment. David's hand tightened on the phone. I'm sorry. What? That's not possible. We have a 5-year term on that loan. Sir, I'm reading from your loan agreement. Section 12.3 clearly states that if the primary collateral for this loan experiences any significant change in ownership structure or resident status, the lender reserves the right to call the loan immediately. I don't understand. Nothing has changed with our house ownership. Mr. Carter, our records show that Margaret Carter was listed as a co-resident and potential co-guarantor on this loan application. According to our monitoring service, Mrs. Carter relocated permanently out of state on Friday, February 23rd. This constitutes a material change in the household structure that supported this loan approval. David's mouth went dry. But she's not even on the loan documents. Not directly, no. But her presence in the household and her financial contributions were factored into your debt-to-income ratio when this loan was approved. Her departure changes your financial profile significantly. This is insane. You can't just call in a loan because someone moved out. Mr. Carter, I encourage you to review Section 12.3 of your loan agreement. This provision exists specifically to protect the bank when household financial situations change dramatically. When you applied for this loan 18 months ago, you listed your mother as a permanent household member contributing to monthly expenses. Her departure represents exactly the kind of material change this clause was designed to address. David was frantically pulling up documents on his computer, trying to find the loan paperwork, his heart pounding as the implications began to sink in. How much time do I have? The full balance of $127,000 is due within 30 days of this notification, which starts today, Monday, February 26th, so the payment is due by March 27th. 30 days? That's impossible. We don't have that kind of cash. I understand this is difficult, Mr. Carter. However, these terms were clearly outlined in your loan agreement. I should also mention that if the loan isn't satisfied by the due date, we will begin foreclosure proceedings on your primary residence. The phone nearly slipped from David's sweating palm. Foreclosure? The home equity line of credit is secured by your house, Mr. Carter. If you default on this loan, we have the legal right to foreclose. There has to be some kind of payment plan, some way to restructure this. Given your current debt-to-income ratio without Mrs. Carter's contribution, I'm afraid you don't qualify for restructuring. Your credit report shows significant outstanding balances on multiple credit cards, a car loan, and your primary mortgage. Without your mother's financial input, your monthly obligations exceed your income by approximately $800. David felt the room spinning around him. How had this happened? How had his mother moving out triggered a financial avalanche? Mr. Rodriguez, surely there's something we can work out. I have a good job, I've never missed a payment. Mr. Carter, I'm not unsympathetic to your situation, but this bank has policies and procedures that exist for a reason. The loan terms were clearly explained at the time of approval. I strongly recommend that you consult with a financial advisor or attorney about your options. What options? You just told me I don't qualify for restructuring. Well, sir, one option would be to ask Mrs. Carter to return to the household, which would restore the financial profile under which the loan was originally approved. The irony of that suggestion hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Ask his mother to return to the household where they'd just told her she was a burden and needed to leave. Another option, Rodriguez continued, would be to find another co-signer with sufficient income and assets to satisfy our lending requirements. And if I can't do either of those things, then you'll need to pay the full balance by March 27th, or we'll proceed with foreclosure. After Rodriguez hung up, David sat staring at his computer screen, trying to process what had just happened. They'd used his mother's presence in the household to qualify for a $127,000 loan that they'd spent on home improvements, a new car for Sarah, and various lifestyle expenses. Now that she was gone, the bank was calling the entire amount due immediately, and they had no way to pay it. His hands shook as he dialed Sarah's work number. Sarah, you need to come home. Right now. What? David, I'm in the middle of a patient. What's wrong? The bank just called. They're demanding immediate repayment of our entire home equity loan because Mom moved out. That's ridiculous. They can't do that. Apparently they can. And if we don't pay $127,000 in 30 days, they're going to foreclose on the house. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that David wondered if the call had dropped. Sarah? I'm coming home, she said quietly. Don't do anything until I get there. The next hour was the longest of David's life. He pulled out every piece of financial paperwork they had, trying to understand how their situation had become so precarious. The numbers painted a grim picture. Monthly mortgage payment, $2,400 home equity loan payment, which would now be $127,000 due immediately. $950 credit card minimum payments, $680 car loans, $840 insurance, utilities, and other fixed expenses. $520 total monthly obligations. $5,390 his monthly take-home pay. $4,200. Sarah's part-time income. $800 total monthly income. $5,000. They'd been living $390 over their means every month, covering the shortfall with credit cards and occasional overtime pay. But more importantly, when they'd applied for the home equity loan, they'd listed his mother's $300 monthly contribution to household expenses as part of their income calculation. Without that $300, they weren't just tight, they were insolvent. When Sarah arrived home, her face was pale and her hands were trembling. How bad is it? She asked. David spread the paperwork across their dining room table, the same table where his mother had quietly eaten meals while they planned their future without her. It's bad. Without Mom's contribution, we can't afford our monthly payments even if we ignore the $127,000 balloon payment. And our credit cards are maxed out, so we can't even cover the monthly shortfall anymore. Sarah sank into a chair, staring at the numbers. How did we not see this coming? Because we were so focused on getting her out that we didn't think about the financial implications. But David, she never signed anything. How can they count her income if she wasn't legally obligated to pay? Because we listed her as a permanent household member when we applied. We told them she was contributing to expenses and would continue to do so. They based our approval on our total household financial profile, not just our individual incomes. Sarah picked up the loan documents, scanning through pages of fine print. This is criminal. They can't just change the terms of a loan because someone moves out. They're not changing the terms. They're enforcing a clause that was always there. We just never thought it would apply to us. So what are our options? David had been dreading this question because he'd already figured out the answer. We can try to refinance everything, but with our current debt load and credit scores, it's unlikely any bank will approve us for enough to pay off the home equity loan. What else? We can sell the house and use the proceeds to pay off all our debts, but we'll probably end up underwater once we factor in realtor fees and closing costs. What else? David took a deep breath. We can ask Mom to come back. Sarah's face went through several expressions: anger, disbelief, and finally a kind of sick resignation. She'll never come back. Not after how we treated her. She might. She's our family, and she wouldn't want us to lose the house. David, she moved across the country with professional movers and didn't even say goodbye to the kids. I don't think she's in a forgiving mood. We have to try. What choice do we have? That evening, they sat in their living room, staring at Margaret's letter and the business card for her attorney. The house felt different without her presence, not better as they'd expected, but hollow and somehow less secure. We could call the lawyer, Sarah suggested. And say what? Hi, we'd like to speak to the woman we just kicked out because we need her money again. We didn't kick her out. We asked her to find her own place. After calling her a burden and telling her to figure out her own life. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I feel sick. About the money? About everything. About how we treated her. About how we took her for granted. About how we made her feel unwelcome in our home after she gave us $120,000. David nodded. The financial crisis had forced them to confront some uncomfortable truths about their behavior over the past 2 years. Do you think she knew this would happen? Sarah asked. What do you mean? I mean, do you think she knew that her leaving would trigger the loan being called in? David considered this. I don't know. Maybe. She's smarter than we gave her credit for. She left her lawyer's information. Like she knew we'd need to contact her. They sat in silence, the implications of that observation settling over them. We really screwed up, didn't we? Sarah said finally. Yeah, we really did. The next morning, David called the law firm in Charleston. Hutchinson, Moore and Associates. This is William Hutchinson. Mr. Hutchinson, my name is David Carter. My mother, Margaret Carter, left me your contact information. Ah, yes, Mr. Carter. I've been expecting your call. That phrase sent a chill down David's spine. You've been expecting my call? Your mother mentioned that you might need to reach her soon. She didn't specify why, but she asked me to be available to facilitate communication if necessary. I need to speak with her. It's urgent. I see. May I ask what this is regarding? David's pride warred with his desperation. He could lie, make up some story about missing her and wanting to reconcile, but something in the lawyer's tone suggested that wouldn't work. We're having some financial difficulties that are related to her departure from our household. I need to discuss the situation with her. Financial difficulties? Our home equity loan is being called in because her moving out changed our household. Financial profile. We have 30 days to pay $127,000 or lose our house. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I see. And you're hoping Mrs. Carter might be willing to help you with this situation? I'm hoping she might be willing to move back, actually. Just temporarily, until we can figure out a more permanent solution. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Carter, I'm going to be direct with you. Your mother anticipated that you might find yourself in this position. She asked me to relay a message if you called seeking financial assistance or asking her to return. David's heart sank. What's the message? She said to tell you that she hopes you'll find a way to figure out your own life. The words hit David like a physical blow. His own words, thrown back at him with surgical precision. Mr. Hutchinson, please. We have children. We could lose our house. I understand this is a difficult situation, Mr. Carter. But your mother was very clear about her boundaries. She's not interested in returning to Phoenix, and she's not available to provide financial assistance. Can I at least talk to her? Can I explain the situation and apologize for how we handled things? I can relay a message, but I should tell you that Mrs. Carter is quite busy settling into her new life here in Charleston. She's purchased a beautiful home and is very involved in the community. She seems happier than I've ever seen her. She bought a house? How did she afford a house? Another pause. Mr. Carter, exactly how much do you know about your mother's financial situation? What do you mean? She's living on a teacher's pension and whatever she had left after paying off my father's medical bills. I see. Well, perhaps that's a conversation. You should have with her directly. I'll pass along your message and see if she's willing to speak with you. After David hung up, he sat staring at the phone, trying to process what he'd just learned. His mother had bought a house in Charleston. How was that possible? Where had she gotten the money? And why did he get the feeling that there was a lot about his mother's situation that he didn't understand? 3 hours later, his phone rang. David? His mother's voice was calm, almost serene. Mom, thank God. We need to talk. I understand you're having some financial difficulties. Mom, I'm so sorry about how we handled things. We were wrong, and I know that now. But we're in serious trouble. The bank is calling in our home equity loan because you moved out, and we don't have the money to pay it. We could lose the house. That sounds very stressful. Her tone was maddeningly neutral, like she was discussing the weather rather than a family crisis. Mom, I know we don't deserve it, but we need your help. Could you come back just temporarily? Or maybe co-sign for a new loan? We'll do anything to make this right. David, do you remember what you said to me on Thursday morning? Mom, I was frustrated and said things I didn't mean. Do you remember what you said? David closed his eyes. I said you were becoming a burden and that you needed to figure out your own life. That's right. And do you remember what I said in response? You said you'd be out by the weekend. No, David. I said it was time for me to figure out my own life. And that's exactly what I've done. Mom, please, we have kids. Emma and Jake don't deserve to lose their home because their parents made mistakes. You're absolutely right. They don't deserve that. So I suggest you figure out a way to prevent it. We can't do this without help. You know we can't. David, for 2 years, you made it very clear that you didn't need me, that my presence was an inconvenience and my contributions were unwelcome. You can't suddenly decide that you need me now that it's convenient for you. Mom, I know we were wrong. You were wrong about more than you realize. Something in her tone made David's stomach clench. What do you mean? I mean that you spent 2 years treating me like a charity case who should be grateful for your tolerance, when the reality is quite different. Mom, what are you talking about? David, I'm worth $6.2 million. The world went silent around him. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, could feel his pulse pounding in his temples. What? I inherited a estate from my great-aunt Eleanor 18 months ago. The full inheritance is worth approximately $6.2 million, including a historic mansion in Charleston where I now live. David felt like he was going to vomit. You've been a millionaire for 18 months? Yes. And you lived in our guest room, eating our food, using our Wi-Fi, while we complained about the grocery bill? Yes. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you thought I had no other options. I wanted to understand what our relationship was really based on. And what did you conclude? That you cared more about your convenience than my dignity, that you saw me as a burden rather than a blessing, that you were willing to push me out of your lives the moment you decided I was more trouble than I was worth. David was crying now, ugly, desperate sobs that he couldn't control. Mom, if you'd known I was wealthy, you would have treated me better? Do you understand how that sounds? That's not what I meant. David, goodbye. I hope you find a way to resolve your financial situation. Mom, wait. But the line was already dead. David sat in his office staring at his phone, trying to process what he'd just learned. His mother was a multimillionaire who had spent 2 years watching them treat her like an unwelcome burden. She could have solved their financial problems with pocket change, but instead, she was letting them face the consequences of their own choices. And the worst part was, he was beginning to understand that she was right to do so. They'd had a multimillionaire living in their house, and they'd made her feel so unwelcome that she'd chosen to leave rather than reveal her wealth. What did that say about them as people? What did that say about him as a son? But the house payment was still due in 28 days, and his mother had just made it very clear that she wouldn't be helping them figure out their own lives. But the house payment was still due in 28 days, and his mother had just made it very clear that she wouldn't be helping them figure out their own lives. The weeks that followed were the darkest of David's life. Each day brought new humiliations as he scrambled to find a solution to their financial crisis, while grappling with the devastating knowledge of how catastrophically he'd misjudged his mother's situation. He tried everything. He applied for refinancing, loans, and was rejected by every bank. He contacted debt consolidation companies who told him his debt-to-income ratio was too high. He even looked into selling the house, but after paying off the mortgage, the home equity loan, and realtor fees, they'd walk away with nothing and still owe $30,000 in credit card debt. Sarah took on extra shifts at the dental office, working nights and weekends, but even doubling her income wouldn't make a dent in what they owed. The stress was destroying their marriage, their health, and their ability to function as parents. But the worst part was the growing awareness of what they'd lost. It started when David found himself thinking about specific moments from the past. 2 years. Moments that took on entirely different meanings now that he understood his mother's true circumstances. Like the time she'd offered to pay for Emma's art classes, and Sarah had insisted they couldn't accept such extravagant gifts from someone on a fixed income. His mother had quietly withdrawn the offer, and Emma had missed out on lessons she would have loved. Or the morning when his mother had suggested they all take a family vacation together, and he'd laughed and said they couldn't afford to travel with extra people to accommodate. She'd never brought up family trips again, or the countless times she'd offered to contribute more to household expenses, and they'd declined because they didn't want to burden her financially, all while complaining privately about how much her presence was costing them. She'd been offering to share her wealth with them in small ways throughout their time together, but they'd been so convinced of her poverty that they'd rejected her generosity and made her feel guilty for even suggesting it. Worse still were the memories of how they'd talked about her future. Sarah researching affordable senior communities and leaving brochures around the house. David calculating how much they could reasonably contribute to his mother's housing costs once she moved out. Both of them discussing what kind of modest apartment might be suitable for someone with her limited resources, all while she owned a $6.2 million estate and could have bought any property in Phoenix without blinking. The humiliation was crushing, but it was the regret that really destroyed him, because David was beginning to realize that it wasn't just his mother's money they'd lost the woman herself, someone who had been quietly, selflessly trying to help them build a better life, even while they made her feel unwelcome in their home. 2 weeks before the loan payment was due, David made a decision that surprised even him. He booked a flight to Charleston. He didn't call ahead. He didn't ask permission. He just bought a ticket, told Sarah he'd be back in 2 days, and flew across the country to see his mother in person. He had no plan beyond apologizing and begging for forgiveness. The money didn't matter anymore. Not really. Yes, they were going to lose their house, and yes, their financial lives were in ruins. But what haunted him was the knowledge that he'd destroyed his relationship with the one person who had loved him unconditionally his entire life. Margaret's house in Charleston was even more magnificent than he'd imagined. The taxi driver had whistled low when David gave him the Rainbow Row address, and as they pulled up to the elegant yellow mansion, David understood why. This wasn't just a house. This was a statement, a declaration that his mother belonged among the finest things life had to offer, that she deserved beauty and comfort and respect. All things he'd failed to give her. He stood on her front porch for 10 minutes before working, up the courage to ring the doorbell. When the door opened, it wasn't his mother who answered, but a woman around his age with kind eyes and a warm smile. "You must be David," she said before he could introduce himself. "I'm Grace. Your mother is in the garden. She's been expecting you." "She has?" "She's been expecting you for 2 weeks. She said you'd come eventually, once you ran out of other options." Grace led him through the house, and David found himself stunned by what he saw. This wasn't just expensive, it was exquisite. Original. Hardwood floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Antique furniture was arranged perfectly in rooms with soaring ceilings and period details. Fresh flowers filled every space with color and fragrance. This was his mother's home. She belonged here, among these beautiful things, living like the accomplished woman she'd always been. He found her in the back garden, sitting at a wrought iron table under a magnolia tree, reading a book and sipping tea from china that probably cost more than his car payment. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and for a moment, David was struck by how different she seemed. In Phoenix, she'd always looked slightly apologetic, as if she was taking up space she wasn't sure she deserved. Here, in her own garden, she looked serene and confident and completely at peace. "Hello, David." "Hi, Mom." would you like some tea? Mom, Grace made lemon cake this morning. It's quite good. She was being polite, David realized, treating him like a guest rather than her son. The recognition of how far their relationship had fallen hit him like a physical blow. Mom, I came to apologize. See? For what, specifically? The question caught him off guard. Where did he even start? For calling you a burden. For making you feel unwelcome in our home. For taking your money and then treating you like we were doing you a favor by letting you stay with us. Go on. For not seeing how much you were contributing to our family. For not appreciating the sacrifices you made. For letting Sarah treat you with disrespect and not defending you. Continue. David felt tears starting to form. For not asking about your day, or your feelings, or whether you were happy. For excluding you from family decisions and treating you like your opinions didn't matter. And for not recognizing that you're an amazing woman who deserved so much better than what we gave you. Margaret set down her teacup and studied her son's face. David, do you know why I didn't tell you about the inheritance? Because you wanted to see how we'd treat you without it. Partly. But also because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that you'd only love me for my money. Afraid that you'd only treat me well because I was wealthy. Afraid that our relationship was so shallow, that removing financial need would remove your interest in having me around. David felt like she'd reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. And I was right, wasn't I? You're here now because you need my help with your financial crisis. Not because you miss me or want me back in your life. That's not true. Isn't it? If your house wasn't being foreclosed on, would you be sitting in my garden right now? David opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again, because he wasn't sure what the honest answer was. I don't know, he admitted finally. At least, you're being honest. They sat in silence for several minutes, David looking around the garden that was so clearly his mother's sanctuary, trying to find words that might begin to repair what he'd broken. Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've been a terrible son. But I want you to know that losing you has been the worst part of this whole situation. Worse than the money, worse than potentially losing the house. I lost my mother, and it's my own fault. You didn't lose me, David. You threw me away. There's a difference. The words were devastating because they were true. Is there any way to earn you back? Margaret was quiet for a long time, looking out over her garden, and David found himself holding his breath. David, what do you think love looks like? What do you mean? I mean, how do you recognize love? How do you know when someone truly cares? About you? David thought about Sarah, about his children, about the relationships in his life that mattered most. I guess, when they put your needs before their own comfort, when they sacrifice for you without expecting anything in return, when they treat you with respect, even when they're frustrated with you. Exactly. And David, for 2 years, I showed you love in exactly those ways. I put your family's needs before my own comfort. I sacrificed my money and my independence without expecting anything in return. And I treated you with respect even when you were making me feel unwelcome in your home. David nodded, unable to speak. But you didn't recognize it as love because you'd decided I was a burden. You saw my generosity as desperation, my flexibility as weakness, my attempts to help as interference. I'm so sorry, Mom. I know you are. But David, sorry isn't enough. Sorry doesn't undo 2 years of making me feel worthless. Sorry doesn't give me back the time I spent questioning whether I was asking too much by simply existing in your space. David was crying openly now, not caring that this sophisticated garden was witnessing his breakdown. What can I do? How can I fix this? You can start by understanding that you can't fix this. You can't undo what happened. You can't take back the words you said or the way you made me feel. So there's no hope? Margaret was quiet again, watching a butterfly land on the roses nearby. David, I need to tell you something. The foreclosure on your house? I could stop it with a single phone call. I could pay off all your debts and still have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. David's heart leaped with hope, then immediately crashed as he saw the expression on his mother's face. But I'm not going to do that. Mom, let me finish. I'm not going to save your house because you need to learn what it feels like to face consequences for your choices. You need to understand that actions have results, and that other people aren't obligated to rescue you from your own mistakes. David nodded miserably. However, Margaret continued, I'm also not going to let my grandchildren suffer for their parents' failures. What do you mean? Grace, could you bring me the folder from my desk, please? Grace appeared a few minutes later with a manila folder, which Margaret opened and spread across the garden table. These are the deeds to 3 rental properties I own here in Charleston. Each of them is a 2-bedroom house in safe neighborhoods with good schools. The rent is $1,200 per month, which is probably less than you're paying for utilities alone. In Phoenix. David stared at the documents, not understanding. If you and Sarah are willing to move to Charleston, I'll let you rent one of these houses. You'll need to find jobs, obviously, but the cost of living here will be much lower than Phoenix, and you'll be able to start over without the crushing debt load you currently carry. You'd do that for us? I'd do it for Emma and Jake. They deserve stability and a chance to build a relationship with their grandmother. And honestly, I'd like to be part of their lives again, if they'll have me. What about me and Sarah? Margaret looked at him steadily. You'll have to earn your place in my life, David. Both of you. This isn't forgiveness, it's an opportunity. What you do with that opportunity will determine whether we can rebuild our relationship. What would that look like? It would look like you treating me with respect, not because you need something from me, but because I deserve it. It would look like you including me in your family's life, not as a convenience when you need help, but as a valued member who has something to contribute. David felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. It would also look like you accepting that I'm not the same woman who lived in your guest room. I have my own life now, my own friends, my own interests. I'm not going to drop everything to babysit your children or solve your problems. I'm willing to be part of your lives, but as an equal, not as a servant. I understand. Do you? Because, David, if you move here and fall back into the same patterns, treating me like I exist for your convenience, making me feel guilty for having boundaries, taking my generosity for granted, I'll evict you from the rental house and you'll be on your own. I won't give you a second chance to disrespect me. The conditions were harsh but fair, and David knew he had no right to negotiate. I'll need to talk to Sarah. Of course. But David, you should know that this offer has an expiration date. If you don't accept it within 2 weeks, I'll rent the houses to other tenants. I'm not going to wait around hoping you'll decide I'm worth your time. David nodded, understanding that his mother had learned to protect herself from people who took her for granted. Mom, can I ask you something? What? Are you happy here? Margaret smiled for the first time since he'd arrived, and the transformation was remarkable. She looked younger, more vibrant, more alive than he'd seen her in years. I'm very happy, David. I have a beautiful home, wonderful friends, and a sense of purpose I haven't felt since your father died. I volunteer at the Literacy Center. I'm on the board of the Historic Preservation Society, and I'm taking art classes for the first time in my life. I feel like myself again. I'm glad, David said, and meant it. You deserve to be happy. Yes, I do. And David? So do you. But happiness isn't something other people owe you. It's something you have to create for yourself. David flew back to Phoenix that evening with his mother's rental agreement in his briefcase and a head full of complicated emotions. Relief that there was a path forward. Shame over how badly he'd misjudged the situation. hope that maybe somehow they could rebuild what he'd broken. But mostly, he felt a deep, profound respect for the woman his mother had become. She could have gloated over their financial crisis. She could have let them lose everything as punishment for how they'd treated her. She could have cut them out of her life completely and lived happily ever after in her mansion. Instead, she'd found a way to help her grandchildren while still holding their parents accountable. She'd offered them a second chance while making it clear that she wouldn't tolerate being disrespected again. It was exactly the kind of wise, generous, principled response he should have expected from the woman who'd raised him, the woman he'd somehow forgotten how to see clearly. 3 months later, David stood in the backyard of their rental house in Charleston, watching his mother teach Emma how to plant roses while Jake helped Grace prepare lunch in the kitchen. The transition hadn't been easy. They'd lost their house in Phoenix, just as the bank had threatened. David had taken a significant pay cut to find a job in Charleston, and Sarah was still looking for full-time work. They were living paycheck to paycheck, driving used cars and shopping at thrift stores. But they were also debt-free for the first time in years. They were building genuine relationships with their children again, instead of rushing through family time between work obligations and financial stress. And slowly, carefully, they were rebuilding their relationship with Margaret. It wasn't the same as it had been before. Margaret maintained clear boundaries about her time and energy. She didn't babysit on demand or solve their problems for them. She had her own full life that didn't revolve around their needs, but she was present in ways that mattered. She attended Emma's school plays and Jake's soccer games. She hosted family dinners where everyone's opinions were heard and respected. She shared stories about her week and asked genuine questions about theirs. Most importantly, she seemed to genuinely enjoy their company again instead of enduring it. "David," she called from the rose garden, "could you bring me the watering can?" "Of course, Mom." As he walked across the yard, David reflected on how different his life looked now compared to 6 months ago. They had less money, a smaller house, and fewer material possessions. But they also had something they'd lost in Phoenix. They had his mother's respect. And David was beginning to understand that respect was worth more than all the money in the world. That evening, after Emma and Jake had gone to bed, David and Sarah sat on their small front porch, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about their day. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Giving up the big house, the good jobs, the life we built in Phoenix?" David considered the question seriously. "I regret how we lost it. I regret the way we treated Mom, and I regret that it took a financial crisis to wake us up. But do I regret where we ended up? No. I think this is where we needed to be. Even though we're barely scraping by financially?" "Sarah, we were barely scraping by in Phoenix, too. We just hit it better with credit cards and home equity loans. At least now we're living honestly within our means." Sarah nodded. "And at least, now we have your mom back in our lives." "We have the chance to earn her back," David corrected. "We haven't proven ourselves yet." "Do you think we will prove ourselves?" David looked across the street at his mother's mansion, where warm light glowed from the windows, and he could see her silhouette moving around her kitchen, probably preparing for tomorrow's Literacy Center fundraiser. "I think she's giving us the opportunity to try. What we do with that opportunity is up to us." 2 years later, David's phone rang while he was at work. It was his mother, calling to invite them to a dinner party she was hosting for some friends from her art class. "I'd love for you all to come," she said. "Emma could show everyone her latest paintings, and Jake could demonstrate that robot he built. I'm quite proud of my grandchildren's talents. We'd be honored to come, Mom." "Wonderful. Oh, and David, could you bring that chocolate cake Sarah made last week? My friends are still talking about it." After he hung up, David sat at his desk, for a moment, thinking about how much had changed. His mother wasn't just including them in her life. She was showing them off to her friends. She was proud of them again. They'd earned their way back into her love. It had taken time, humility, and a complete transformation of how they approached their relationship with her. But slowly, carefully, they'd rebuilt the trust they'd broken, and David had learned something invaluable in the process. Love isn't about what people can do for you. It's about recognizing their worth, respecting their dignity, and choosing to value them even when it's inconvenient. His mother had tried to teach him that lesson while living in their guest room, offering her generosity and receiving their resentment in return. Now, finally, he was ready to learn. That weekend, as they sat around Margaret's dining room table sharing dinner with her friends, David watched his mother tell a story about her volunteer work, her eyes bright with passion and purpose. She was completely in her element, surrounded by people who appreciated her wisdom and enjoyed her company. Emma and Jake hung on their grandmother's every word, and David realized his children were getting to see their grandmother the way the world saw her, as the accomplished, interesting woman with stories to tell and wisdom to share, not as a burden, but as a blessing, which David now understood was exactly what she'd always been. The lesson had cost them everything they thought they wanted, but it had given them back something infinitely more valuable: a family built on respect, love, and genuine appreciation for each other. And as David looked around that table, watching his mother laugh with his children and his wife, he realized that this warm, loving, authentic connection was worth more than any mansion, any bank account, any material possession they'd ever owned. His mother had been right about everything. She'd just been patient enough to let them figure it out for themselves. 5 years after that terrible morning when David called his mother a burden, Margaret Carter sat in her Charleston garden reading a letter from Emma, who was now 15 and had just been accepted into a prestigious summer art program. "Dear Grandma," the letter began, "I wanted you to be the first to know that I got into the Rhode Island School of Design summer program. I know it's expensive, but Mom and Dad said they'll find a way to make it work because they know how much art means to me. I think I get my love of beautiful things from you. Thank you for teaching me that it's okay to want beauty in my life, and that working hard for what you love is always worth it." Margaret smiled, folding the letter carefully and adding it to the box where she kept all her grandchildren's correspondence. David and Sarah had learned to stand on their own feet, to solve their own problems, and to value relationships over transactions. Emma was becoming a confident young artist who understood the difference between wanting beautiful things and feeling entitled to them. Jake was growing into a thoughtful young man who treated everyone with respect, regardless of their circumstances. They still lived in the rental house, but they'd earned the right to call it home. And Margaret had earned something even more precious: a family who loved her for who she was, not what she could provide. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Mom, we're having a barbecue on Sunday. Would you like to come? No pressure if you have other plans, but we'd love to have you." Margaret typed back, "I'd be delighted. Can I bring anything?" "Just yourself. That's all we need." And for the first time in years, Margaret believed that was actually true. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the chance to prove they're better than their worst behavior. And sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who don't value what you bring to their lives, and then, if they prove they've learned their lesson, the grace to let them earn their way back. Margaret had learned both lessons well, and now, finally, so had her family. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.